You wake up when your body is ready. No alarm clock shattering the silence. No glowing screen demanding your immediate attention. No commute waiting to drain your energy. For 99% of human history, this wasn't some fantasy vacation. This was every single morning for roughly 300,000 years. Today, you measure your life in 40-hour work weeks and fleeting weekends. Your calendar is a grid of obligations. Your worth is often calculated by your daily productivity. You live in a society that glorifies the hustle and pathologizes rest. But what did your ancestors actually do with their time before clocks were even invented? How did they fill the hours when survival was supposedly the only job on the market? You have probably been sold a very specific story about prehistoric life. It is a story of constant, desperate, unyielding struggle. You picture cavemen huddled in freezing darkness, always one missed meal away from starvation, fighting off saber-toothed cats with sharp sticks. In this version of history, ancient humans had zero free time because they were too busy just trying not to die. But the archaeological and anthropological records tell a completely different story. It turns out that your ancient ancestors probably had significantly more free time than you do right now. To understand how they actually spent their days, we have to look at the people who kept living this way well into the modern era. In 1963, an anthropologist named Richard Lee traveled to the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa. He wanted to study the Juhoansi, a traditional hunter-gatherer society that still lived much like our ancient ancestors did. Lee decided to track exactly how much time they spent working to survive. He meticulously recorded every single hour spent hunting, gathering, and preparing food. The results completely shattered the myth of the struggling caveman. Lee found that the average adult spent only 15 to 20 hours a week acquiring food. That is effectively a 2 to 3 hour workday. By Wednesday afternoon, their work week was entirely over. So what did they do with the rest of their time? They rested. They played games. They visited friends in neighboring camps. They simply existed. This wasn't just a fluke of the Kalahari ecosystem, which is a harsh desert environment to begin with. It was a pattern seen in foraging societies all over the globe, from the Arctic Circle to the Amazon rainforest. Anthropologist James Sussman has spent decades studying how early humans conceptualized work. He argues that our hunter-gatherer ancestors lived in what Marshall Solins famously called the original affluent society. Affluence in this context doesn't mean they had a lot of physical stuff. It means all their material needs were easily met with minimal effort. Because they only wanted what they actually needed, they were always incredibly wealthy in time. They didn't store food for years in advance because their environment was their storehouse. When you deeply trust your environment to provide, you don't feel the crushing anxiety of artificial scarcity. You do not hustle. You do not grind. You get exactly what you need for the day, and then you stop. But surely survival in the wild required constant vigilance? What about predators, diseases, and the harsh elements? It is true that prehistoric life had acute dangers. If a predator approached, your ancestor's body flooded with cortisol, triggering an intense fight or flight response. But that stress was designed to last for a few minutes. Once the danger passed, their nervous system returned to a state of deep, relaxed baseline calm. Today, your brain interprets a passive-aggressive email from your boss the exact same way it interprets a charging lion. The difference is the email never really stops charging. Modern humans are drenched in chronic, low-level stress all day, every day. Ancient humans experienced brief moments of terror surrounded by oceans of tranquil leisure. So let us reconstruct a typical day in the life of your ancient ancestors. You wake up with the sun, feeling completely rested. The morning air is crisp and cool. There is no frantic rushing to get dressed, no forcing down a processed breakfast while checking the news. You sit by the smoldering ashes of last night's fire. You chat quietly with your family as the camp slowly stirs to life. Eventually, when hunger naturally arises, you head out with a small group to gather food. You are not marching in military formation. You are walking at a leisurely pace through a landscape you know as intimately as the back of your own hand. You spot some hidden tubers. You gather a handful of wild berries. Perhaps someone in the group tracks a small animal by reading the subtle disturbances in the dirt. This work is not mindless drudgery on an assembly line. It is highly engaging, deeply social, and physically rewarding. Your brain is perfectly evolved to map the terrain, track animal movements, and identify hundreds of species of edible plants. By early afternoon, you have gathered everything your group needs for the day. You return to camp. The heavy heat of the afternoon sets in. And this is when you do something that modern corporate society actively punishes. You take a long, guilt-free nap. In prehistoric times, sleep wasn't compressed into a desperate, unbroken 8-hour block at night. It was fluid and responsive to the environment. Resting in the afternoon was a biological imperative, not a sign of laziness or a failure of productivity. When you wake up from your midday rest, the later hours of the day are dedicated to tool making, crafting, and grooming. This is a time for quiet focus and intimate bonding. You might shape a piece of flint into a sharp blade. You might mend a carrying net woven from plant fibers. You might pick insects out of a child's hair. You do these things surrounded by the gentle, constant hum of conversation. There is no rush to finish. The act of making the tool is just as important as the tool itself. If you doubt that ancient humans had this much free time, look at the archaeological site of Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. This site features massive, incredibly intricate stone pillars carved with images of wild animals. It was built over 11,000 years ago. That is long before the invention of agriculture or metal tools. The sheer amount of time, coordination, and caloric energy required to carve and move these massive stones proves a profound truth. These hunter-gatherers were not struggling to survive. They had massive surpluses of free time to dedicate to art, religion, and monumental architecture. As the sun begins to set, the rhythm of the day shifts entirely. The anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent time recording and analyzing the specific types of conversations held by the Juhoansi. She discovered a fascinating difference between how they talked during the day and how they talked at night. During the daylight hours, conversation was highly practical and transactional. People talked about economics, food distribution, and social complaints. It was the ancient equivalent of office talk or arguing about the bills. But when the sun went down and the campfire was lit, everything changed. The campfire was the original social media, but vastly more nourishing for the human soul. Wiesner found that nighttime firelight conversations were almost entirely about storytelling, myth, and the spirit world. The flickering light relaxed the brain. It physically extended the day, allowing human imagination to run wild in the darkness. This is where your ancestors built the complex social bonds that allowed our species to conquer the globe. They sat around the fire, watching the embers glow, and told stories that connected them to the stars, the animals, and to each other. This is why, to this day, you feel a deep, primal sense of peace when you stare into a crackling fire. This balanced, low-stress lifestyle lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. It permanently shaped your biology. It hardwired your psychology. It is the exact reason your body craves movement, your mind craves nature, and your heart craves deep social connection. But then, about 12,000 years ago, we made a choice that changed everything. We invented agriculture. We were told in history class that farming was our greatest triumph. We thought that by planting crops, we were finally conquering nature, securing our food supply, and liberating ourselves from the wild. But agriculture was a trap. When your ancestors started farming, their workload absolutely exploded. Instead of a 3-hour foraging trip, they were suddenly locked into backbreaking labor from dawn until dusk. They had to clear land, plant seeds, weed massive fields, and haul heavy water. The human spine, which evolved for fluid walking and running, was suddenly bent over crops all day long. Fossil records from early agricultural sites show a massive increase in joint disease, malnutrition, and dental decay compared to the healthy hunter-gatherers who came immediately before them. We essentially traded our free time, our varied diet, and our physical health for the ability to stockpile grain. And the moment we had stockpiles of grain, we needed people to guard them. We needed people to manage them. We needed people to build walls around them. The concept of extreme inequality was born. The concept of the endless work week was born. We systematically created a world where human value was tied directly to labor output. The original affluent society was dead, replaced by a society of artificial scarcity and endless toil. This brings us right back to you. When you sit at a desk for 8 hours a day, staring at a screen, your brain is quietly rebelling. Your biology is deeply confused. You are a creature built for short bursts of intense, meaningful effort, followed by long, luxurious periods of rest and social bonding. When you feel exhausted by the modern grind, you are not lazy. You are not broken. You are just experiencing the massive friction between the world you live in and the world your body was actually built for. Your ancestors did not spend their days fighting for survival in a bleak, miserable landscape. They spent their days mastering their environment, enjoying the company of their tribe, and cultivating a wealth of free time that we can barely imagine today. They understood something fundamental that modern society has completely forgotten. Life is not a product to be maximized or a quota to be met. It is an experience to be lived. So tomorrow morning, when the alarm goes off and the grind begins again, remember who you really are. You wake up when your body is ready.